Talk Ava. Learn English with confidence.
You ever have that moment where you understand everything in English, but when it's your turn to speak, nothing comes out the way you want it to? The words are there somewhere, but they don't come together fast enough.
That situation is more common than people think. Many learners reach a point where listening feels easy, but speaking still feels difficult and slow.
If you are new here, welcome to Talk Ava. We focus on real English conversations that help you speak more naturally in everyday situations.
And if this kind of content helps you, you can like the video, share it with someone learning English, and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss future episodes.
Now, let me share something that happened recently. I was watching a short video in English, and I understood almost everything without any effort. The ideas were clear, and I could follow the conversation easily.
That usually gives you confidence, because it feels like your English is improving.
Yes, and right after that, I joined a small online meeting. It was a simple discussion, and I thought it would be easy to speak as well.
So your understanding was already active before you started speaking.
Exactly. But then, something unexpected happened. Someone asked me a direct question, and I knew the answer immediately in my mind.
That sounds like a normal situation so far.
It was, but when I tried to speak, I paused for a few seconds. I knew what I wanted to say, but I couldn't form the sentence quickly.
That pause is the moment where most learners feel stuck.
Yes, and it was not because I didn't understand the question. I understood it clearly. The problem was turning my idea into a sentence fast enough.
So the issue was not knowledge, it was production.
That's right. I started building the sentence in my head, but it felt slow. By the time I spoke, the moment had already passed.
That can feel frustrating, especially when you know you have the ability to understand everything.
I finally said something simple, but it didn't fully express what I wanted. It felt like I gave a basic answer instead of a complete one.
That usually happens when you simplify your idea just to keep the conversation moving.
Yes, and after that, I kept thinking about it. Why can I understand complex sentences but struggle to produce simple ones?
That question is important because it points directly to the real problem.
Later that day, I had another situation. I was chatting with someone, and they said,
"Not at all." But again, I paused before answering. I had the idea, but I was searching for the right way to say it.
That shows the gap between understanding and speaking very clearly.
Yes, and I noticed something else. While I was thinking, I was building full, complex sentences in my head.
That can actually slow you down because you are trying to be perfect instead of being natural.
Exactly. And by the time I tried to say it, the sentence felt too long to manage.
So instead of speaking naturally, you were trying to construct the perfect sentence.
Yes, and that made everything slower. I ended up saying something shorter again, but it didn't match what I really wanted to express.
That pattern is very common. Learners understand more than they can produce, and that creates frustration.
At that point, I realized something important. Understanding English and speaking English are not the same skill.
That is a key realization, because many learners think that understanding automatically leads to speaking.
But in reality, they develop at different speeds. You can be very good at understanding and still struggle with speaking.
And if you don't train speaking directly, that gap stays there.
That is what made me look at this problem more seriously. It wasn't about vocabulary or grammar anymore.
It was about how the brain processes language during real-time speaking.
Exactly. And that's where things start to become interesting. Because once you understand why this happens, you can start fixing it.
And that is what we are going to explore next.
We are going to break this down step by step, using the same situations so everything stays connected.
That way, you will not just understand the problem, you will see how it develops in real conversation.
So after those situations, I started paying closer attention to what was happening in my mind while I was speaking. I realized that understanding felt fast and automatic, but speaking felt slow and controlled. That difference is important because it shows that these are two separate processes. Understanding happens almost instantly, but speaking requires construction. Yes, and I noticed that when I listen, I don't build sentences. I just receive meaning. But when I speak, I have to create the sentence step by step. That means speaking is an active process, while understanding is more passive. Exactly. And that explains part of the problem. I had trained my understanding a lot, but I had not trained my speaking in the same way. Many learners spend more time.
That hesitation is what people notice in conversations. It is not about mistakes, it is about the delay.
Another thing I observed was that I was trying to speak in full, complex sentences from the beginning.
That can slow you down because longer sentences require more planning.
Yes, instead of saying something simple, I was building a complete idea with extra details. That made it harder to speak quickly.
So you were aiming for perfection instead of clarity.
Exactly. And that made speaking feel like a task instead of a natural process.
When speaking feels like a task, your brain becomes slower and more careful.
That is what I experienced. Even in simple situations, I was thinking too much before speaking.
Let's connect this back to your earlier example in the meeting. You understood the question immediately, but you paused before answering.
Yes, because I was building the sentence step by step. I was not thinking in English directly.
And during that time, the conversation continued, which increased the pressure.
Exactly, and that pressure made it even harder to speak smoothly.
This shows that the problem is not a lack of knowledge, but a lack of automatic speaking ability.
Yes, and I also realized that understanding gives a false sense of progress. You feel confident while listening, but speaking reveals the gap.
That is why many learners feel confused. They think they are improving, but then struggle when they need to speak.
Another example helped me see this clearly. I was watching a conversation online, and I could predict what the speakers were going to say next.
That means your understanding was very strong.
Yes, but when I tried to repeat the same idea in my own words, I couldn't say it smoothly.
That shows the difference between recognizing language and producing it.
Exactly, and producing requires practice. It is not something that develops automatically.
So now we can see three main reasons. First, understanding is passive while speaking is active.
Second, thinking in another language and translating creates delay.
And third, lack of speaking practice makes it difficult to produce sentences quickly.
When I saw these 3 points together, the problem became much clearer.
And once the problem is clear, it becomes easier to work on it.
Yes, because now I knew what I needed to change. It was not about learning more words, it was about changing how I use them.
That will help you recognize these patterns in your own conversations. And that can feel frustrating because you know you had something useful to say.
Exactly. And this happened again in another situation. I was talking to a friend, and he asked me, "What did you do yesterday?"
That is a very simple question.
Yes, and I knew the answer immediately. But instead of saying something simple like, "I stayed home and worked," I tried to build a more detailed answer.
So you were aiming to sound more complete.
Yes, but that made it harder. I started thinking about how to connect ideas, which words to use, and how to make the sentence smooth.
And that slowed you down again.
Exactly. And by the time I started speaking, my answer felt less natural. It sounded more like something I had prepared, not something I was saying in the moment.
That shows how overthinking affects fluency.
Another situation made this even clearer. I was in a group discussion, and someone asked a question that I had already heard before.
So you were familiar with the topic.
Yes, and I even knew how I wanted to answer. But when I tried to speak, I hesitated again.
What was different this time?
This time, I noticed that I was trying to avoid mistakes. I was choosing safer words instead of saying what I really wanted.
That means your focus shifted from communication to correctness.
Exactly, and that made my sentence simpler than my actual idea. I reduced my answer just to avoid making an error.
That is a common pattern. Learners often limit themselves instead of expressing their full thoughts.
Yes, and that creates another problem. You start thinking that your speaking ability is limited, even when your understanding is much higher.
That gap becomes more noticeable over time.
One more situation happened while I was texting someone.
I wanted to send a message explaining something clearly.
Writing usually gives you more time to think.
Yes, and I noticed that I wrote the message more easily than I could say it.
That shows that time reduces pressure.
Exactly. But it also showed me something important. When I have time, I can organize my thoughts better. When I don't have time, I struggle.
So the real challenge is speaking in real time, not forming sentences in general.
Yes, and that is where practice becomes important. Speaking requires speed, not just knowledge.
Let's go back to your earlier meeting example. You paused before answering a question, even though you knew the answer.
That way, you will see how small changes can improve your speaking, step by step.
After noticing these patterns in different situations, I realized that I needed to change how I approach speaking, not just learn more words or grammar.
That is an important shift because the problem was not knowledge, it was how you were using that knowledge in real time.
So I started with something simple. Instead of trying to build perfect sentences, I focused on saying the idea in the simplest possible way.
That reduces pressure because you are no longer trying to sound advanced while speaking.
For example, in a conversation, instead of thinking about a long explanation, I would say something short, like, I think this is a good idea because it saves time.
That kind of sentence is clear and easy to produce quickly.
Yes, and once I said the first part, it became easier to continue. The sentence started building naturally after that.
So you focused on starting quickly instead of planning everything in advance.
Exactly, and that helped reduce the pause at the beginning. I didn't wait to form the full sentence in my mind.
That is a useful technique because starting is often the hardest part.
Another change I made was to stop translating in my head. Instead of thinking in my native language, I tried to think directly in English. That can feel difficult at first because your brain is used to translating. Yes, but I started with simple thoughts. Even basic sentences like, I need to finish this today, helped me practice thinking in English.
That builds a direct connection between your thoughts and the language.
Exactly, and over time, that reduced the delay. I didn't need to convert my ideas anymore.
What about the pressure of making mistakes?
I changed my focus there as well. Instead of trying to avoid mistakes, I focused on being clear. That allows you to speak more freely because you are not stopping to check every detail. Yes, and I noticed that even if the sentence was not perfect, the conversation continued naturally. That is important because communication is the main goal. Another thing that helped was practicing short responses. Instead of trying to give long answers, I kept my responses simple at first. That makes it easier to respond quickly in conversations. For example, if someone asked me, "What did you do yesterday?" I would say, "I worked at home and finished a few tasks." That is a complete answer without being complicated. Yes, and if needed, I could add more details after that.
In the chat situation, instead of translating, I would think directly in English and say, "That sounds interesting. I agree with that idea."
That keeps the conversation moving without delay.
And in the casual conversation with my friend, I would give a simple answer first, then expand if needed.
That approach works in most situations because it balances speed and clarity.
Over time, these small changes made a big difference. I didn't feel stuck anymore when it was my turn to speak.
That shows that fluency is built through practice, not just understanding.
Yes, and now if I think back to the original problem, it feels much clearer. The issue was not my ability to understand English.
It was how you were trying to use it while speaking.
Exactly. And once I changed my approach, speaking became easier and more natural.
So let's summarize this in a simple way. Speak simple first, think directly in English, and focus on clarity instead of perfection.
And most importantly, practice speaking regularly, even if your sentences are not perfect.
That is how the gap between understanding and speaking starts to close.
If this lesson helped you, you can support the channel by liking the video, sharing it with others, and subscribing to Talk Ava.
Your support helps us create more lessons like this and reach more learners who need it.
Keep practicing, stay consistent, and focus on small improvements.
Over time, your speaking will become more natural, and you will feel more confident in real conversations.